Hello, I'm Milton Kane. I'd like to talk to you about economics and how it affects our world we are in today. There have been some very serious changes that have occurred in our whole economic situation. And we as people, that is the Christian Democratic Party, we need to know how to understand the economics of where we are at, how it applies to policies. There have got to be a lot of policy changes that have to occur as a result of where we find ourselves today. The current events and decisions due to the virus we are overtaken by have created a very unusual economic set of circumstances that need to be understood. The advice given to most governments around the world is via the International Monetary Fund. And I've always maintained that this organisation is one total care needs to be used when accepting their advice. After all, they are a part of the UN. They are also committed to total absolute globalisation, which is another way of putting a single world administration. Political arrangements for nations tend to be anywhere between laissez-faire capitalism to communism. Well, actually, we've never had laissez-faire capitalism. The closest you'll get to that in any book is by Aaron Rand. Well, neither of these extremes have been practiced, that is, the laissez-faire capitalism and communism, have been practiced anywhere in the world. The propaganda of both have inspired many books. In Australia, we tend to be towards the capitalism side of the midway point between both dogmas. We've always desired a degree of government interference in the economic and political arrangements. The real question is, how much do we as a political party want government involved in the economy and the political decisions of our nation? The question I hope we can find in unity in answer to these answer to these questions over time across all areas of government. The need to understand economics to develop affordable, sustainable policies is very important for a mature political party, which I hope we consider ourselves to be. I cannot take you through a 4-year uni course. If I did, you would need to unlearn many of the biases of the unis and then evaluate them into the real world of economics. Too many economics is about numbers. And while there are numbers, it's more about human relationship to the numbers rather than the numbers themselves. So economics is a social science at best. Many within economics community will assert that their pet theory is the correct thing to do. And so from the outset, let's debunk that. Essentially, something that we do today will not necessarily be the same thing that we will choose to do under certain circumstances sometime in the future. We are going through a significant virus concern at the moment, one which equates to the virus concern of the Spanish flu in 1919 to 1920 as it affected Australia. We are in a very different position to that time then. And we need to have a look at all the history associated with that. To many economists, it's held to stimulate the economy by reducing interest rates. While this can be seen to happen from time to time, it will depend upon many other factors, including stability of income, the need to spend to purchase additional products, the ability to take a holiday, the person's aspirations of population. Given all these variables, it will also depend upon the interest being charged at the time. After interest rates peaked some time ago at 19% on housing loans, and then they were at 17%, a reduction of 0.5% did see an increase in debt being taken out. But when interest rates on housing are at 2.5%, there is little impact at all. One demonstrated loans were becoming cheaper, while the other showed that you can only go up from such a low level, hence the lending caution. Of course, there is one other position. You can go into negative interest rates on money held at a financial institution. More about that later. One of the things to understand the whole point about where we are at is we need to understand how Australia got to be where we are, I think. Now, what we need to look at is Australia economic direction. First of all, we came from a convict settlement. Then we went to freedom and independence as the convicts were freed. Then we developed into farming, mining, processing and manufacturing. And now we've gone back due to a globalization, things that came out of the 1975 Lima Convention agreement that was signed by Gough Whitlam in May 1975. We are now a service industry, essentially, and mining for exports. Australia's directional for personal freedoms, again from convicts to free settlers. Competition to foreign interests were coming in. We allowed competitors of foreign interests to come in. Then we're becoming slaves, as it seems, to the financial services today. This can be seen by the fact that during the inquiry in 2018, in spite of the fact that billions of dollars were defrauded from the Australian population by the financial services, no one went to jail, though there is a 10-year jail penalty and a $10,000 fine for each and every occasion of a conspiracy to defraud. The banking inquiry did expose a huge, massive conspiracy to defraud by all financial institutions. How else can they charge you for things you didn't need, things they didn't deliver, and yet to be able to walk away from that relatively unscathed? So, how did we get things so wrong to be where we are? We believed we couldn't do it alone, so we invited foreign investors. That's not a bad idea if when you are doing something, if you can't do it alone, to invite people to help. But you must maintain control or you lose control. We encourage foreign capital investments, and so slowly but surely things that we owned were suddenly not being owned by us. We entered into unbalanced partnerships, and a classic case in point in that was the unbalanced partnership that they had between Holden of Australia and General Motors. So the decision by General Motors of America to kill off the Holden brand was going to be a natural consequence of an unbalanced partnership. We need to do better. We let the partners buy us out. That's exactly what happened with General Motors and Holden. Not only that, we subsidised our industries. The government subsidised industries and yet did not take a chair, did not take a seat, did not take anything over the money that they were bailing out these industries. The car industry received huge supplements, and yet the government had no management or control. The other industry, which I point out, is BHP, the so-called big Australian. I call it the big Australian rip-off company. This company was given money under the John Button steel plan, was given money to build 3 electric arc furnaces in Newcastle to replace the ageing and polluting coal-fired furnaces. And what happened? They closed BHP, they went international, got our steel from St. Elsewhere, not Australia. That was an appalling decision. It was right to help the business to get into that area. Yes, it was wrong to let them make those decisions without any input at all by those people who had invested the huge amounts of money. That was John Button and his department. Unacceptable. So we've got to now consider, and what we will do over the period of time that we will look at this, consider a way back to our own independence, which is what we need to do. When this crisis is over, we actually have to recommence our manufacturing industries. In fact, I've sent a letter to the Prime Minister, still waiting for a reply, howbeit, that he should ask General Motors to give us back the Holden Icon and to re-establish the old Australian 6 motor company that we had in the 1920s and re-establish it under Defence Materials so we can actually use the old car plants to start producing Australian military vehicles, and therefore then from there onto government vehicles, including police, emergency services vehicles. We could do that and recommence manufacturing of the car industry. This will help many of the other industries which created the motors and all the other support mechanisms for the car industry. We could quite easily do that. We need to recommence processing of our mine products. It is absolutely ridiculous for us to get iron ore out of the ground in this country, ship it overseas for others to be able to use to do what they like, and for us to only buy the finished product, which is substandard in most cases to what we used to do, and is also very expensive. We need to buy back many of the assets currently foreign owned. The way to do it is complicated and difficult, I suppose. One of the simplest ways of doing it is introducing an act whereby we are asking foreign companies to divest their interest in Australia. We give them a period of time to actually divest that and put increasing taxes upon them until they do. It wouldn't even be a bad thing to introduce an income tax of about 51% to all foreign earned money that is earned by foreign people in this country. We wouldn't be the first country to do that, and neither should we be the last. We should make trade deals which are in the best interest of Australia. Not according to these free trade deals, but really the best interest of Australia, so that the Australian people are not being shortchanged. All of the trade deals over the automotive industry, we were shortchanged because we ended up with no cars produced in Australia. Every time an Australian is unemployed due to this, we, the others who work, must cover their costs of living. We need to increase income taxes on foreign companies. I've already alluded to that. We need to aim for full employment for all Australians fit to work. One of the big things is many economists aim for something far less than full employment. When you have full employment, you actually have a workforce that becomes subservient to those who are offering the work. What that actually means is simple. When you are at the negotiating table to negotiate your wage, if in fact there is a queue of people outside ready and willing to take on that job as well, you will take it for a lesser amount of money. Because after all, you have your family at home, you have your debts, you maybe have a housing loan or whatever, you've got your car to run and whatever else you've got. You've got those things. Without the money, you can't fund them. And so hence you are prepared to take a lesser amount of money. You are not equal at that negotiating table because that queue outside is long. When Bunnings in Wallsend wanted to open, they cut off the applications for their positions at 1,500 job applicants. They could do that, and yet there was many more applying. They already had enough. They had enough there to negotiate a good wage outcome for the business, not necessarily for the people. We need to reassess our retirement income with constitutional protection. We actually had one of the best pension systems that was created in 1909 in Australia. It was absolutely destroyed by the Australian governments, particularly since 1972. One of the problems is with our current system. What happens is a person who is on a large wage is compelled to put money away for his retirement. And because of all of the circumstances, what happens is that he or she will have millions of dollars at their disposal at their retirement. But you take the average Joe Blow, even the person who just does a labouring job the entirety of his life, he will only have small bickies at the end of his retirement years. And as Paul Keating said some 18 months ago, the government needs to take out insurance because people are living longer than the compulsory superannuation fund studies predicted, and hence they're running out of money when they get into their 80s. We need to do far better for retirement. Under the old system, everybody paid a set percentage of their wage towards the fund, and everybody got the same amount of support irrespective of their circumstances. That, I believe, is fair. The reason why it's fair is the person on wages over $500,000, they will never ever be able to get back the amount of money they've put in simply because of one simple factor: they won't live long enough. If you put the income exactly the same for everyone who is on the pension, you will actually do okay. That means the basic will be covered by every pensioner in this country that retires. So there are many things that we can do, and over time I hope to lead the party through the various policy decisions we have to make to bring about an economic recovery. So we'll get back onto the issue about interest rates and how it affects us everything. Responses to interest rates depend upon your degree of wealth. That's what it comes down to. A financial struggler will have limited capacity to change their debt structure when interest rates change, while the wealthy have the capacity, but often their decisions about debt arrangements have nothing to do with that. Often they're totally independent in every way. And of course they also have the capacity, very often, to make things tax deductible, whereas others may not be so easy to do so. Given all of that I've said, we now need to proceed. The simplest way ahead is to look briefly at a book which is called 50 Economic Ideas That You Will Really Need to Know by Edmund Conway. Now you can get this book online. It's not hard to get hold of. Get the book online. It costs about $12 thereabouts, something like that, online. You can buy a hard copy of it if you wish. This particular book, what it does, it doesn't give you an economics degree. It won't make you a full bottler on it. But what it does, it takes 50 topics of economics. And what it does, it explains each one of them. Not necessarily their interconnectedness, and they all are interconnected. But it breaks down some of the jargon that is there. Many of the things in that book, they're complementary to each other, while some are looking at the same thing just from an opposite view or a completely different standpoint. There are others which seem to be absolutely opposed to each other. And economics sometimes is confusing because of that. Because what you'll do in one circumstance, it would be very wrong to do in another. Firstly, we must understand what our main tool of economics is, outside of the human person and human personality. And that is money. Money is a medium of exchange. That's all it is. In fact, it's been said of money, money is what money does. That's as simple as that. However, in today's world, we actually have two main types of money or currency. One is the electronic currency, and the other is the cash, the whole cold hard cash that is supposedly backed by our government. The International Monetary Fund, as we move closer to potentially negative interest rates for the banks on our invested money, they want to see the cash reserves reduced. They want to even possibly go into negative, because as we hit onto the negative area, everybody will then decide to store their money in cash. So there are two ways the IMF says you manage that. One is you withdraw cash. You may do it by lottery means, where you simply say notes of a certain denomination will be able to be removed from society on a certain date. And so suddenly, maybe if they've chosen the digit 9, so all your notes, that when you look at the number on it that ends in 9, will be withdrawn, will be of no value at all. That's one way of reducing it. The other way of reducing it is to actually impose a variable tax. What you do, you get a tax and you simply say, oh, well, what we're going to do, we're going to charge, we already pay, as you know, a GST on products of 10% in this country. What we could do is we could simply say, if you pay for by cash, what we're going to do, we're going to put the price up. Maybe charge 20% for cash. So you wouldn't put it up to 12%, because currently if you use electronic transaction, the banks charge you for that electronic transaction under some circumstances. Other circumstances they don't. But they charge you under some circumstances. And when we look at all of that, what we can see is there's pressure not to hoard the cash. Unless you've got enough, it doesn't make any difference. We already have approved through the Parliament a law that simply says that if you want to buy something for cash over $10,000, you've actually broken the law, and you can be charged accordingly. Negative interest rates is something that we're going to have to look at later on. It's something that is very sad that we need to even consider. But let's go to I guess one of the basic things that most of us understand, which is the law of supply and demand. Where we have this happens in life, if a society wants 10 tonne of wheat, well, the farmers will need to grow 10 tonne of wheat. If demand kicks up, they need to grow a bit more. If it kicks down, they need to grow a bit less, or they've got excess supply. One of the things about the European Common Market, if we remember, and those of us who are familiar with the series of Yes Minister / Yes Prime Minister, will know that there was references there to the EU, and they talked about the butter mountain and all those sorts of things that were being created because of it. And there was truth in that, because they were subsidising farmers to do things in one place and another, and as a result of that there was excess supply, and therefore they had to manage to control prices. But when we actually have supply and demand balanced, there is a theoretical balance of that. When it is balanced, that is when the demand for a product is equal to the supply. It also has to come into the other very important situation, which is the cost of production. So it means the amount of money that people are prepared to pay for a product, the amount of money that it costs to produce a product, and sometimes if it costs a lot of money to produce a single product, but if you produce 1,000 of them, they become cost effective. But if you produce 1,000 but you can only sell 100, then you have an imbalance. And so what you do is you actually have to work out how many need to be produced and what sort of supply is needed. Then you come to a point of balance in that area. There's a diagram which I'll show you on how it points to this point of balance. It not necessarily is in the middle, but it's there somewhere, and it can change as demand or supply changes, or costs change one way or the other. There are many ways in which industry manipulate both the area of demand and supply. In the 1920s, in fact 1923, American industrialists got together and they began a plan where they would, into their manufacturing process, they would put what's called a planned obsolescence. That meant something was only going, which could have lasted for a long time, was designed not to last for so long. Hence, having a fridge, for example, that was produced, and often the old kerosene fridges would last for a long time. You'd have one of those fridges, you know, you could get a lifetime out of the fridge. But that wasn't helpful, because once you sold a fridge to everyone, there was no more market. You only relied upon the actual natural growth of the population. And that was unhelpful. And so planned obsolescence means that instead of the fridge lasting for 50 or 60 years, you make sure it lasts for around about 10 years. One of the interesting things when I pick up on a fridge, is that the copper pipes that were used to produce the Australian-made fridges were not so porous to the gas that was used. In fact, 50 or 60 years later, many of these fridges never needed regassing. But currently, most of our fridges today are produced by copper pipe that's produced in China, which is a lot thinner. And though it may seem a little bit unusual, because unless you understand the molecular structure of products, the gas can actually escape at a very slow rate, but it can escape through thin copper pipe. Now, whilst the material used in the refrigerant today is less damaging to the ozone layer, because more of it escapes than what was escaping from the fridges before, the question is, and nobody wants to answer, how much extra damage is this new manufacturing process causing to the ozone layer? One of the things we do, we say we make a safer gas, and we forget that it's safer if it's at the same volume. But if you have a greater volume of it escaping, then it is no longer safer, if you can understand what I'm talking about. There was another company that actually found a way to manipulate things as well, and that was in regard to diamonds. De Beers, a South African company involved in diamonds. What they did is they wanted to manipulate the market to put the cost to get the price of diamonds to rise, because diamonds were only just one item amongst various types of precious stones that were being used at the time for jewellery. So what they did is they created a few movies. One of them was Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, and of course they also co-sponsored the other one where Diamonds Are Forever in the James Bond movie. These were to promote the idea of the value of diamonds. The advertising that was used at the time constantly kept on saying that same message in many different ways. Without a diamond ring, he does not love you, he does not really love you. He can't say he loves you until you have your diamond ring. That emotional pressure was sufficient to be able to put the diamond engagement ring to become the central focus of those people proposing to get married, and continues today to still be in high demand, as you can attest to at any jeweller shop you go to today. When Argyle Mines in Western Australia decided that they wanted to market their own diamonds, De Beers said to them, you'll have to market them through us, because if you don't, we'll flood the market. Because De Beers have created an artificial shortage of diamonds. What they have effectively done is for the diamonds that they produce, which are capable of making jewellery, they have withheld 90% from the market and just marketed 10%, so they can get the best price possible. If the demand for diamonds was to decrease, in other words, people weren't prepared to pay the excessive price, perhaps they would release a little more. I don't know. But they have the backup supply in a massive vault. And that's what they do. This is how you can actually manipulate demand and supply. If you hold back on supply, you can see the demand. We can see this at this time in the corona crisis. What we are seeing is that there are some products which are costing a lot more at the supermarket because we've had some hoarders in there grab a whole lot of this material, and suddenly there's not so much on the market, and so the prices of some things have increased quite extraordinarily. So what we're able to find is that advertising can create a stronger demand than is necessary. Particularly when it plays on the emotions, particularly when there is an emotional relationship involved, they can do that, and there's no more emotional response, I guess, than leading up to a marriage, the engagement leading up to a marriage. Controlling suppliers by monopoly ownership of the supply market, that's one of the things that happened, or even collusion, which effectively is the same. And the limiting of supply will always drive up the price unless the demand decreases. If you can make sure that the demand continues, you'll crank up the price. What does this show us about economics? Demand can be real, a totally real need. I mean, I need water to drink. And so hence we have a high demand for water if it's restricted. There are real needs, but also some needs are inflated needs. They're inflated by emotions, they're inflated by all types of advertising and other things. Keeping up with the Joneses. This is what everybody does. All of those things assist in getting that demand up. Supply can be maintained and to the extent of the manipulation depends upon the extent of the control that the supplier has over a supply chain. This is one of the reasons why it is best to have as much as possible an open market. So how should we discover policy positions based upon all of what I've said so far? We need to answer the questions: should regulations prevent monopoly control, and if so, to what extent? Should advertising regulations be in place restricting manipulation, and to what extent? Entertainment programs can also manipulate behaviour, so should entertainment programs also face that same thing about as if it is an advertorial? We also need to consider about the single desk for farm products. Formerly, what used to happen in Australia, we had a single desk policy. What happened is all of the farmers would sell their grain to an organisation which made a single desk so they would get the best product and the best price. Nowadays, the farmers have to deal with it themselves, and they become small players, and they are supplying into a big supply. Exactly the same happens with the milk industry, where you have the same situation. A lot of farmers, you have them that needs to be processed to be able to be usable. And so what happens is that all of the farmers, very few of the farmers have sufficient supply to be able to actually argue for a decent price. And so when there used to be cooperatives where they were farmer-owned cooperatives. And when they got developed into a company, what actually happened was that these companies would then push the price down so that in fact for the litre of milk that the farmer sells to the market, he can get as low as 10 cents or even below sometimes of a litre for his milk. So we need to ask ourselves, what happens there? We also need to think about how will this affect international trade? How shall we do it? How does this affect globalization? You know, at the moment, the whole thing is a global market. We have the whole thing all together. We're all mates together. But are we really? Do you think that the people in other parts of the world really care about how well you and I do? And what about multinational companies? What should our attitude to be towards multinational companies? After all, the Lima Convention Agreement in 1975, without going through all the details, which would take some time, was essentially to establish manufacturing industries in other countries, which is not a bad ideal in one sense. It's a matter, very often, like most things, how you do it. To actually go and establish these companies, they used multinationals. So what would happen is a company established in one part of the world would go over there and to establish their production over there. For example, one of the things that happens, as we know, been on the news a bit in Australia some time back, Kmart Australia was very much involved in having their clothing done in Bangladesh. The people would turn up, the workers in Bangladesh would turn up. They were locked into a room where they worked for 12 hours. And sure, one could argue, well, boy, their life is a lot better off than it was before. And yet, they were doing that for a pittance. And we got the clothing back here, and Kmart was making huge profits. Of course, their clothing was a lot cheaper. And that was the way it was. But the problem we have to ask ourselves, the big problem we have, if in all of this, is it the right thing to do? New South Wales Parliament and also the Federal Parliament has introduced similar legislation which is trying to be modified, changed and altered and possibly watered down, I don't know where it's going exactly, about modern day slavery, trying to prevent modern day slavery. There is nothing worse than slavery by having people in another country be our slaves and work in a condition where the remuneration they get, they still have a subsistence living. Surely, if people work an honourable job, they should not have a subsistence living, which really comes back to Australia again about our wages that we have here. And it's an essential thing. The purchasing of a home, if we go back into the 50s, we would find that the price of a home to buy for the mean wage, the mean average wage, it would be around about 3 to 4 years of the mean wage to purchase that home. That would be the price of it. Today, it's somewhere around about between 12 and 15 times. It depends upon what you're looking at in regard to that. So that has caused huge problems as well. Essentially, we should be able to see, I believe, that a person who works at a job, and remember during the 50s, a person would work 44 hours a week and he would receive a single wage for his family, and they were able to live comfortable within their expectations. And I say that quite clearly, within their expectations. And their families could have amounted to, obviously, the husband and wife. 10 or 12 children was not unnatural. And yet today, a person working 44 hours a week would hardly be able to pay the rent in some of our major cities. We've gone somewhere a bit strange. During the last federal election campaign, I was involved in supporting a claim for Build Them Here. I sent a letter to Gladys Berejiklian and still waiting for a reply in regard to the purchasing of trains and trams for Australia. I indicated to her economically, even if it cost 30% more to produce the train in Australia than was cost to import it, even given the fact that we didn't have to make changes and alterations to the purchased product to fit Australian conditions, which mostly we've always found we had to do. What I indicated to her, because of the GST and the other taxes that actually happened, we are far better off paying the Australian business 30% more. And we would still be getting it in the long term far cheaper. After all, when we consider this, an employed person is less likely to cost excessive amounts of money for health, excessive amounts of money for social disruption through the police force, through courts, through drug addiction and so many other things. You see, one of the problems with people who are unemployed is that they don't know what to do. They haven't got something meaningful to do. When you don't have something meaningful to do, there's not much stopping you from a destructive life. And that's where we've been. We need to change where we go. And now I've done this video, I'll give people some time to look at it, and then we will have an opportunity to feed back into that, which I will do via a Zoom connection. If you've heard this video and you want to be in the Zoom connection, I ask you to contact me so that I can let you know when that's going to happen. Thank you. I will continue with this on another occasion when we will deal with more and more aspects of the economic circumstances we find ourselves in. These are troubling times. If we don't come out of this right, if we don't come out of it better than we did in 1920, we could face 1929 again. Thank you. God bless you.